What's going on, everybody? This is Moose here from OccupyFantasy.com, alongside with Jake. We're here to talk about UFC Vegas 78. Jake, what's going on, man? How's it going?
Pretty good, man. Been a while since we got to do a stream together. So yeah, Brian's in Italy, and here we are.
I know, and I'm on my way to Korea literally after this, but the show must go on. So the wife's mad at me in the other room because we're doing the show. That means we got to do it, blow it absolutely out of the park, give the absolute best plays and breakdown, so we can win a bunch of money and they can be happy. So here for UFC Vegas 78, you see on screen here, we're going to be talking about some of the top plays, the main events, some newcomers, any good fighter, bad fighters. Go ahead with some prize pick plays, some bets, and close it all out. Ready for that, Jake?
Yeah, man. Let's get it.
Perfect. So first thing is the main event. See him on screen here. Jake, why don't you talk about the fight and what it means for DFS?
Yeah, man. Should be a pretty good fight. Pretty evenly matched. Rafael Dos Anjos coming in as a slight favorite, -125 right now, so close to a coin flip. Pretty old, 38 years old, former lightweight champion. He's fought at both 155 and 170. Most of his career has been at 155. He's just 5-4 in the UFC at 170 pounds, but getting up there in age, not really trying to make that weight cut anymore.
Yeah.
The writing was kind of on the wall that he wasn't going to get another title shot. So he said he just wants to, extend his career longer by not having the dramatic weight cuts. He's got a ton of 5-round experience. So this is going to be his 14th 5-round fight in the UFC. He's 7-6 in his previous 13. 8 of those were at 155 or went 5-3. He's only 2-3 at 170-pound 5-round fights, but he's been facing some really tough competition. So hard to blame him on some of the guys he's been going against, like Usman and Edwards and Covington. I think he's getting a little bit of a more favorable matchup here. Most of his fights get extended, which is generally going to be good for DFS. Lots of time to rack up points. His last 9 5-round fights have all made it to the championship rounds. 7 of those went the distance. One ended in a 4th-round submission over Kevin Lee back in 2019. And then the most recent was a 2022 round 5 KO loss to Fiziev. Tough fight, really tough spot for him, really tough takedown defense. Dos Anjos is a high-level black belt. He's trying to grapple. Fiziev completely shut that down. When he can get his grappling going, we've been seeing Dos Anjos put up massive scores. He's averaging 143 DraftKings points, 131 points on FanDuel in his 4 5-round decision wins. And his 3 finishes is averaging 102. So pretty good there, but really putting up just like slate-breaking scores when he can get 5-round decisions, tons of time to grapple, racking up takedowns and strikes. He should be looking to wrestle here. Luque is primarily a striker. He is an opportunistic submission threat, but not great defensive wrestling. So I think RDA is going to come in. He's going to be looking to wrestle. He's going to put up a huge DraftKings score if he wins a decision. So I think it's a good spot for Dos Anjos. He's going to be popular for good reason. Luque has just a 61% takedown defense, and Luque is coming off. They were calling it a brain bleed. He had a brain hemorrhage in his last fight. Probably not what you want to hear going into a 5-round fight. He took a year off after that. It was his first knockout loss of his career against Jeff Neal, and honestly, he looked bad in the fight. So who knows at what point did his brain start bleeding in that fight, because he did not look normal at all the whole time. And honestly, he didn't look great the fight before against Bilal Muhammad, which was his first 5-round fight of his career where he lost a decision. So a little bit tougher to get behind Luque. He's a guy he's a fun fighter, but he's only 31, but a lot of wear and tear on his body. The guy has been in so many wars that it's just hard to know where he's at. He's 7 years younger than Dos Anjos, but it seems like wear and tear-wise, he's just as far, if not farther. He almost had to end his career after the brain hemorrhage. Doctors were like, yeah, your brain's bleeding, so we don't know if you should be fighting anymore. He's like, So he took a year off. He said he's good to go. He said that everything's cleared. He got, he had to pass all the medicals. Obviously, they made him go to a bunch of different neurologists and stuff and make sure that he wasn't going to die in there, hopefully. But always a fun, always a high volume fighter. Generally going to score well, averaging 107 DraftKings points in his 14 UFC wins. 13 of those have come early, so obviously a finisher. probably needs to knock Dos Anjos out here. I mean, Luque loves going for Bravo chokes, but really hard to see him submitting Dos Anjos, who's like a fourth degree black belt. I don't think RDA's ever been submitted. He's been knocked out like 4 times. So I would say Luque is, a KO or bust, but decent shot at getting a knockout if he can regain his past form, which we don't know, man. His last 2 fights, he looked pretty rough. So we'll see how Luque looks. He's kind of an unknown, and RDA at his age, he could go off a cliff at any moment. So a little bit of a volatile fight and close to a coin flip, but I really like RDA in it. I think he can out-grapple his way to a win. I think whoever wins is going to score well, and RDA is 8,200 on DraftKings. Luque is 8,000, so it's going to be hard for either guy to get left out of winning tournament lineups. So you're probably going to want to play one in most of your lineups, but the field's going to be doing that too. So if something happens, something crazy happens, which there's a lot of weird stuff could happen. I mean, maybe last minute Luque doesn't get cleared by some doctor that sprints into the octagon. I don't think that's going to happen, but if something weird happens, a no contest, who knows? It would be crazy leverage on the field in any lineup that fades this if somehow it busts. But I think it's going to have a hard time busting on either site. So I think you're going to want to play one in high risk. And in low risk, I think you stack it on DraftKings. Good chance that it goes the distance and they combine for a ton of points.
Yeah, makes sense to me. And I love the fading in the high risk. Very, very high risk strategy, but when it works wonders. So thanks, Jake, for the main event analysis. Let's talk about some of the UFC newcomers on the slate here. So first one up, first fight of the night is Luana Santos. Jake, tell me about her.
Yeah, so she's really young, really green, just 23 years old, 5-1, 3 submission wins, 2 decision victories. She's got a judo background. She's been doing judo since she was like 8 years old, and it totally shows in the way she fights. She comes in looking for those like head and arm judo throws, similar to Sac Conejo, which, when they work, they're like, oh, cool, like you got them down, and you kind of end up in a headlock position, but it's a risky move in the UFC, especially going against a grappler, because it really exposes your back. So if you don't secure it, then you're basically just giving up your back. And she's going against a grappler here in Miller, so a little bit of a risky spot for her based on kind of her go-to move. So I'm a little bit nervous about that. She's making her debut following a pair of LFA wins, so it's not like she was coming off Contender Series or anything, just straight to the UFC. 2 of her last 3 fights have gone the distance, and 4 of her last 5 have made it to the 3rd round. So she hasn't really been putting people away super early, which is somewhat concerning because she hasn't really been facing anyone decent. So it's like she's been facing bad competition and not finishing them early and doing a move that's probably not going to work in the UFC. So lots of red flags there. Still super young. We'll see how she looks, man. I think she could come in wide-eyed. You never know. Half her career was spent at 135, and then she dropped down to 125. So she should have decent size. But yeah, I would say I'm a little nervous about her, and I think she's getting brought on a little early. But we'll see. Maybe she can prove me wrong.
Okay, perfect. And then the very next fight with Jose Johnson coming off a win from the Contender Series. What do you think about him?
Yeah, so this is his 3rd time trying to make his debut. He dropped out of the last 2, which is kind of concerning, and now he's stepping out on short notice. He was announced as the replacement Monday night, so not very much time to prepare for Johnson. 28 years old, 15-7 with 10 finishes. Really tall for the division. He's 6 foot tall at 135 pounds, which is, super lanky and long, but that also kind of leaves him exposed to his terrible defensive wrestling, which we saw he went on Contender Series twice, got dominated by Ronnie Lawrence, and then he went on again and actually won a decision the 2nd time, but still got taken down a bunch. He got taken down 18 times between those 2 fights and controlled for 18 minutes. So, I mean, it just kind of shows you how rough his defensive wrestling has been, and now he's going against a grappler on short notice. So really tough spot here for Jose Johnson. I think we're probably going to be more interested in playing him down the road than in this spot. So, hopefully he just gets submitted here. We give him at low ownership next time. I think that's the plan.
Okay, perfect. And the last newcomer, where is he? Isaac Bulgarian, 5-0, the Midwest Choppa. What do you think about him, Jake?
Yeah, another young guy, still really green, 27 years old, 5-0, five first round finishes. They're basically all the same. He gets people down, finishes them on the mat. He only turned pro in March 2021, and all of his fights were over like an 11-month window, and now he hasn't fought in 18 months. He had a really weird situation where the Nelk boys were like sponsoring the event, and they said that they were going to give the best winner or whatever a contract. They said they were going to give it to him, then they just kind of ghosted him. So he was just sitting around, like waiting for all of 2022. And then he was training at Glory MMA when all that stuff went down in late 2022. So I don't know if that played into like they were like, we don't want to sponsor this guy. Like he's associated with James Krause. I don't know exactly what happened, but he just got kind of left on the shelf by them. Then he had to switch gyms. Then he was going to make his debut against Dan Argueta in January of this year, but he tore his LCL. He sat out for 2 months, came back, re-injured the LCL, sat out another 2 months, bought an RV, drove it out to Factory X. He's currently living outside Factory X in an RV in Colorado, just training there and hanging outside. So obviously he's dedicated to pull that off. But you kind of wonder about a guy that, has such a limited experience with only 5 fights, 5 first round finishes, all against really low level of competition. We don't know what his cardio is like. We don't even know what his striking's like because he just gets everyone down so fast. He's got a wrestling background. Clearly he's good at what he does, but we don't know if that's going to transition to the UFC. So really more question marks than answers with this guy. Super wide range of scoring potential. Like all of his wins would have scored great, but we'll see if he can actually do that at the UFC level against legitimate competition. I would say normally when you see these guys, they come in with a very limited record in all first round finishes. It's like an immediate red flag that, they haven't really faced any adversity. They haven't been tested. And if that singular game plan doesn't work in the UFC, then they might look like a fraud. So we'll see, man. I would say high upside, but low floor.
Okay. Works for me. And so that's all the UFC newcomers we have on this card. Now time for my favorite section of the video is the good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup on all fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC. Jake, I'm going to give you a list of fighters that have less than 4 fights in the UFC. You're going to tell me if they're a good fighter, bad fighter, and if their current matchup is good or bad. And we have a lot of them. So first fight of the night, we talked about her a little bit. Luana Santos, good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, I think she's a bad fighter, and it's like a volatile matchup, because Miller's not really any good either. But she's a grappler, so I guess I'm gonna call it bad fighter in a high upside, but still a bad matchup.
Okay, and then her opponent, Juliana Miller, good fighter, bad fighter.
Yeah, kind of similar because they're both grapplers who are pretty bad. So I think she's a bad fighter. Good chance she gets controlled here, which is going to be bad for DFS. So I guess I would still probably call it a bad matchup. Kind of a submission or bust play.
Okay. The very next fight, just talked about him again as well. Jose Johnson.
Yeah, I think he's a bad fighter based on how bad his defensive wrestling is, and I think it's a bad matchup against a grappler.
Okay. And his opponent, Damon Blackshear, good fighter, bad fighter.
Yeah, I'm not ready to call Blackshear a good fighter, but it's definitely a good matchup. So bad fighter and a good matchup.
Perfect. And keeping on the trends with the very next fight, we have Jacqueline Marie. One fight, good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, we just saw her get exposed in her debut, completely gassed out in the later rounds. So we can't call her a good fighter. She's a decent grappler, but she's a bad fighter. I think it's a good matchup, though, man. She's going against Montserrat, who's coming off like a 2-year layoff, knee surgery, got knocked out in 35 seconds in her last fight. Montserrat's tiny. She's like 5 feet tall. She weighed in 3 pounds under the limit. So I think it's a good matchup, man. And I think for DFS, it's a good buy low spot on Amarim, nice, despite the fact that I think she's a gasser.
Nice. So you need that round 1 finish. And her opponent,
yep.
Sac Conejo, good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, she's like a worse version of Luana Santos with that that head and arm throw. So I think I'm going to call her a bad fighter in a bad matchup. But it's one of those things like it could turn into a good matchup if Amarim completely gasses, which is totally possible. But I still think it's a bad fighter in a bad matchup.
That makes sense to me. Going on with the next fight, we have Martin Buday. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, it's such a sloppy heavyweight fight. I think he's a bad fighter. Like he's not terrible. He's kind of like a meh fighter in a good matchup. Parisian is absolutely terrible. So yeah, I think Bidet has Parisian covered everywhere. So good matchup and sort of a meh fighter.
Okay. Going on to the next fight. Where is it? We talked about him coming 5-0. Isaac Bulgarian. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, this guy is like a complete mystery box, but it's definitely a bad matchup. So, I would lean towards Bulgarian being bad until he proves he's good, and I don't think he's done that yet on the regional scene. And on the other side, Marshall, I think Marshall is good, man. I think Marshall's a good fighter, but he's kind of going against the mystery box. We don't really know what Bulgarian is, but based on debuting, limited experience, I would say it's probably a decent matchup. But now Bulgarian will totally just like floor Marshall in the first round.
Exactly, right? Hey, that's what you need for high risk, right? And
right.
Next up, we have in the 8th spot, we have Mike Breeden, nickname Money. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Yeah, I mean, anyone with a nickname Money has to be good, right? Nah, I think Mike Breeden. I think Mike Breeden's bad though, man. He was training at Glory MMA, man. He's been on a long layoff. He's training with Trey Ogden up the road now at Marathon MMA. So like Glory, discount version of Glory, basically. Like some of the fighters went there because it was nearby. He's got a lot of heart, man. If you watch his Levy fight, like the dude showed up in the 3rd round, but I think he's got bad wrestling. I think he's a little bit chinny. So I think he's a bad fighter. And we all know what the deal with McKinney is at this point, right? Like he's either going to finish you in round 1 or turn into a pumpkin in round 2. So it's like, it's a high upside matchup, but he could also floor you in 7 seconds. So it's a risky high upside matchup, but I think skill set wise, it's a bad matchup. I think McKinney can knock him out. I think he can take his back and submit him. I think it's a tough spot for Breeden, but I'm sure people will be on Breeden after seeing McKinney lose just 4 weeks ago, and they took this fight on short notice.
Yeah, absolutely. Coming up next, we have the 7th fight, fight number 7. We have JP Bays, good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
Like we're basically just doing an entire rundown of the whole prelims.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I think, McGee got that short notice win in his last fight. I still think he's a bad fighter. I don't think the guy can grapple. I know he trains at MMA Lab. He's got a bunch of good training partners, but I'm not sold on him. I still think he's a fraud. And, man, JP Bays has been absolutely dominated in all 3 of his fights. But I think this is the time that JP Bays finally gets on track, notches his first UFC win. I think that McGee is going to be outclassed in the grappling here. So I think McGee is a bad fighter in a bad matchup. And I think Bays is a bad fighter in a good matchup.
Perfect. And let's see here. Next, we have Josh Frim, who is going up. Doesn't have a nickname. Couple fights under his belt. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Man, so he missed weight by 3 pounds in a must-win spot. He's 1-2 in the UFC. He's fighting for his contract. Shows up 3 pounds heavy. I feel like that shows you a lack of discipline. I think he's a bad fighter. I think it's a good matchup. Pickett's been finished, I want to say, in his last 4 losses and 3 straight losses in the first 2 rounds. I mean, you have to say it's a good matchup for Frem, but like not a good look missing weight by a bunch when you desperate to save your job here. So I don't know what he's doing, man. I think the guy's kind of just like not very professional, kind of a joke, but he's a decent finisher. He's a high upside fighter.
Okay. Let's see here. We got 2 more left here. Going on, we have AJ Dobson coming off 2 losses. Good fighter, bad fighter. Good matchup, bad matchup.
Yeah, man. Anyone that watched the last Dobson fight, it was so frustrating where he just like wasn't throwing, he wasn't really wrestling. Like he would get a takedown, then just like give up the position. He's so young, man. We got to call him bad at this point. He's super athletic though, so I think he has potential. And then Tafon also missed weight by 3.5 pounds here, and I have never seen a human move slower than Tafon walked onto the scales and missed weight by 3.5 pounds. Like it was swimming in molasses just to get up there. So I think it's a good matchup, man. Tafon's coming down from 205 to 185. He's doing that huge 20-pound cut. He's coming off back-to-back knockout losses. Dobson is desperate for a win. He just changed teams because he was so pissed off. He changed teams 3 days after his last loss. He was like, it's not working, guys. So at least he's aware that fight sucked, and he said he's going to come in and make this a war. So I think Dobson is a bad fighter and a good matchup. Long-winded explanation.
Nice. And our last one is Yasmin Luciendo. Good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
I think she's good, man. She's still young, like really young. She's 21. She's really athletic. I think her main problem is fight IQ. She's just not capitalizing on her advantages in matchups. Like she should have gotten a finish in her last fight, and like she landed takedowns. But if you watch the fight, they were like the most poorly timed takedowns ever. They were coming like right at the end of rounds, and she would go straight to full mount, and then the round would end, and then she wouldn't shoot for a takedown until the end of the next round. So I just think she hasn't really put it all together in her head, which is concerning when you're going against, a very dangerous submission threat and apparently knockout threat all of a sudden in Polyana Viana, who is basically all of her wins come in the first round, typically by armbar. So, I mean, like Lucindo, if she fights smart, should be able to win, but I'm not convinced she's going to do that. And I think Viana could probably convince her to go to the mat, whether it's by pulling guard or just leaving herself exposed for a takedown. So I think Lucindo is a good fighter, but I think it's a bad matchup, and I think she's going to be at risk of getting finished there.
Makes sense to me. So that's all the good fighter, good matchup, bad matchups that we have. It's like every fight on the prelims. And we pretty much talked about all that. But Jake, outside of all those prelim fights, or maybe even the main event or anything like that, is there any fights that we need to target on this slate tonight or tomorrow night?
Yeah, man, I think obviously the McKinney one's obvious. Like anytime he fights, there's always a finish like early, but I'm not going to give that one out. I think the Marcus McGee JP Baez is a good one to target, man. Baez has been absolutely dominated in all of his fights, giving up a ton of points to his opponents, but he's also got a ton of wrestling upside, and he's the cheapest fighter on the card. So either he's going to get like knocked down like 4 times again and get knocked out, and McGee's going to score 1,000,000 points. Or what I think is going to happen is Baez is going to finally get his wrestling going and submit McGee and get a first round finish, maybe a second round finish as the cheapest fighter on the card. So whoever wins, I think they're going to end up in the winning lineup.
That's where you just bet the under that and hope that one of them gets it, right?
Yeah, I think the under is like negative like 600 or something.
But throw it in a parlay, you'll be good. And let's see here. Speaking of stuff like that, we have a partnership with Prize Picks. Jake, really, really good at that stuff. Jake, any of your top Prize Pick plays you have for this slate?
Yeah, I mean, sticking with the same note as the last thing we talked about, I like McGee under 40.5 significant strikes. I think either he's going to get a knockout or Baez is going to out wrestle him. Either way, I don't think McGee is going to put up a big striking total here, and Baez has never absorbed more than that. So I think it's a good spot for the under there.
Makes sense to me. And to close it all off, let's take a look at, we do a stream parlay where Jake picks a leg, I pick a leg, go ahead, and we all sweat it in Discord together. Jake, do you have anything on your side?
Yeah, I'm gonna stick with Baez, man. His money line at plus 290. I just think it's too wide, man. That was the first thing that stood out when I opened the slate. I was like, oh, Marcus McGee is the biggest favorite. Well, that's interesting. So I'm gonna go with that money line at plus 290.
Nice. And you already know who I was going to pick before the show even started. Going Polyana Viana inside the distance. I would go sub, but apparently she's a knockout expert now, so I'm going inside the distance. Plus 250 over on FanDuel. Jake, what would that get us combined in the parlay?
Yeah, no, it's solid, man. That'll get us to plus 1265.
Perfect. Just what we'd like to see. So go ahead and sweat the stream parlay in our Discord with us as well. Jake, any last thoughts or anything else you want to talk about for the card?
I think it's a good slate, man. Hopefully we stay with 13 fights. I know we had those 2 big weight misses, so fingers crossed both those fights are still on. Not sure if I've heard anything officially yet, but they both did face off, so that's encouraging. But man, it seems like it's been a while since we've been able to get some decent sized cards. So really hoping we can get all 13 here.
Yes, that would be great. So so that'll do it for the show. If you like what you see, go ahead and check us out, occupyfantasy.com. If you like the video, give us a thumbs up and comment down below, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. We'll be here next week. I won't be here. It'll be Jake and Brian back to normal. Until next time, us from Occupy Fantasy, have a good night and good luck.